In this video, we are going to look at all the different Claude models and see which one is useful for what. And so, yeah, let me just straight jump into it. By the end of the video, you're going to know what are the different Claude models, why they are different, and which one you should use depending on the task that you have at hand. All right, so let's jump straight into it. The only thing is that a lot of videos that I see are explaining Claude models that are non-existent anymore. And the reason for that is because Claude is just bringing in a lot of new updates quite fast. And so there is no more Sonnet 4.6 or Opus 4.7 or 4.8. And they are all now Sonnet 5 and Opus 5. And another big one is that a lot of people are talking about a Mythos grade model that you cannot have. And because only some companies called Project Glasswing have access to that. We'll talk about that as well, but we do have a Mythos grade model available, which is called Fable 5. And so we'll go into all of that. All right, so let's get started. Here's the whole Claude family. There are multiple models essentially. And the cheapest one is Haiku. Then you have Sonnet for essentially everyday tasks. Then you have Opus and then Fable, which is the Mythos grade new model, which is just very good. And so in general, you would want to use Haiku for super cheap and fast tasks. Then Sonnet kind of as a default, Opus something that is useful for more essentially harder work. And then Fable is the really expensive one, but really capable model, longest and best reasoning, and it is more capable to do tasks that take a longer time. And so I also put here some pricing on essentially their input and output token cost. But before we go into that, let me quickly explain what tokens are, what is input and what are input and output tokens, and then also let's talk a little about the context window. So those three things. So what is a token first? The token is very simple. It is just a number. For Claude, you have essentially 250,000-ish tokens. And this is a quick thing on how LLMs work actually. But so tokens is the only thing that the LLM sees. It doesn't see you talking to it in English or Spanish or any other language. All it gets is a straight line, a string, if you will, of numbers between 0 and 250,000. And then the LLM just puts out, this is your input tokens, by the way, those numbers. And then it will just go ahead and put out another string of tokens, which are just also numbers. And so let's say the LLM is here and you are here. I guess I'm not visible on the video. Let me make that full screen, full camera. Perfect. So you are here and the LLM is here. And between you guys, there is something called a tokenizer. And the tokenizer is just taking your English or whatever language you're speaking to it and turns it into numbers. So for example, 1 would be a specific token, a specific number. But if you say, I don't know, Miami, that may be also 1 token, but New York or whatever else that is just a longer English word. I was just trying to say cities, but then I kind of realized cities are probably also 1 token. But anyway, any longer English word are probably broken down into different tokens. And I would be happy to show you something called Tick Tokenizer that essentially turns, you guys can check it out. Maybe I can show in the next video, but that tool essentially shows you if you put any input in there, how it would look in tokens. Now, that was important to understand because going back to it, now we can understand what tokens are. And so input tokens is what you put in, and then output tokens is what the LLM generates and gives to you. Output tokens are about 5 times more expensive. Well, not about, actually exactly 5 times more expensive for all of the models. But when it comes to billing, you will usually pay more for input tokens. And so the reason for that is that even though output tokens are just way more expensive, there is way fewer output tokens. It's just the LLM's response. But the input tokens, whenever you talk to an LLM, so you talk to Claude, then essentially with your subscription, what happens, and the reason why Claude is having a context window or understands what happened before during that conversation is because Anthropic built a software around it that will note your chat essentially and feeds it back to Claude every time you send a new message. So if you have a Claude chat or a Claude code window open for a while, it feeds back everything each time you send something. Because an LLM on its own is kind of an API and it's stateless. So what that means is every time you call it, you need to give it all the input tokens and it will just generate a string of output tokens based on that, but it doesn't remember anything. And that's why you need to always refeed the whole conversation. And so if you have a long chat or a long conversation, it's going to be a very long input token each time you send something. And so I think now we covered what a token is, what an input and an output token is. And so now we can understand, actually maybe the last thing to understand is the context window. The context window is essentially what you feed back each time as input tokens. And with newer models, it's not only the messages that you have sent, which used to be the case, by the way, earlier with the first models of ChatGPT. But now, whatever tool it uses or whatever it reasons, the model, all of that will go into the context window. So for example, if you say, go search the internet and find amazing 5-star restaurants for me in New York, where I can go out for Friday night, then it will do that search. It will check the text that internet search returns, and that goes into the context window that is then fed back to the model every time you send a new message. So, okay, now we understand what a token is, we understand input and output versions of that, and we understand what the context window is. All right, perfect. So then we can go back to the Claude family. So you have Haiku, Sonnet, Opus, and Fable. And it's also worth understanding which one to use. I mean, obviously, Fable is the strongest, Opus is a little weaker, Sonnet is a little weaker, Haiku is the weakest. But so it's very easy to understand which one is the best model, because obviously the more expensive one is just way better. But I think the right question to ask is which model will essentially go ahead and be able to do a task that I want it to do cheapest. Because obviously Fable will be able to do all of your tasks, but it will be expensive to use Fable all the time. Now, that being said, I usually use Fable for most of the things because I have a subscription on Claude, the max plan. And with the max plan, you get a 95% off, essentially, if you max out your plan versus using the API pricing. And so I think that is a very unique opportunity in time where we are right now, where these LLM providers like OpenAI and Traffic and Grok as well, and Gemini too, I think, all give you a massive discount on subscription. So there it makes sense to just like token max, essentially, as some people say, and just use Opus and Fable for most of the things. But whenever we work with clients who are using the enterprise API, we actually recommend implementing and understanding what tasks require which model. Because a lot of time we actually just recommend using Sonnet because it's a very capable model already and can do a lot of things. And so whenever we do, for example, the data analytics task, then we usually just use Sonnet because we already built out a system or an automation with Fable or Opus and pre-tested and understand edge cases, and all of that is documented. So that specific workflow can now easily be run by Sonnet because it doesn't have to reason and find new things. It just have to follow something. And if the workflow is even easier, then you can just use Haiku, although both of them are relatively cheap. So yeah, I think when it comes to the family, the biggest takeaway here is that there are 4 different models. Obviously, Haiku is worst, Fable is best, but there is a massive difference between pricing. If you're using a subscription plan, I think you can just go ahead and default to Opus and Fable because you just have so many tokens available to you and it's super cheap at around 95% off. But if you're a company and using an enterprise tier, then it really makes sense to understand which task require which agent or which agent can help me do this task well at the cheapest cost. All right. So let me go ahead. Here we just actually deep dive a little bit more into the models. I think we can go fast here. The only thing with Haiku, the reason we don't really recommend it to clients and just default to to Sonnet is because Haiku's context window is very low. It's around 200,000 tokens. Now, what that means, we already talked about what a token is and what's an input token. And so what that means is that when you're chatting and you ask it to go out and search the internet, or you ask it to do a research about your competitor, all of that text is going into your context window. And Haiku is quite more limited because you can only go up to around 200,000, while with Sonnet, Opus, and Fable, it's all 1 million. So you can have way longer chats. And something very important to say is that LLMs degrade pretty hard and they don't degrade gracefully. And so if you're above 50 to 60% context window being full, then you really want to either compact or just use a new chat, because they degrade pretty hard, they start to hallucinate, and it's just not going, like the quality will degrade very, very significantly. So say that Haiku is filled up to like 150,000 tokens out of the 200K, then your responses are going to be terrible and it's gonna work pretty bad. While if Sonnet is filled up to 150K, you're only at 15%, so it's going to work incredibly well. So that is another very important takeaway. If you go above 50-60%, you either want to compact or ideally open a new chat. And by the way, for that, if you want a couple of slash commands that we have created and are really useful, such as like slash handover or slash precompact that we use in order to save the useful stuff, because a lot of times you have an amazing chat and then you have to kill it because the context window is full and now you have to restart. And so for that, we developed the handover and the precompact versions that will actually be able to give you a free context window or a compacted one that is actually good. So if you want that, feel free to leave a comment and I will send it to you for free. But so that being said, Haiku we usually don't recommend using because of the low context window. It's funny we say low, by the way, in 2026. In 2022, when ChatGPT came out, its context window was actually 8,000. So like way, way lower than 200K. And we were using that. Like I remember having fun using it back in 2022. And now we think 200K is low and we default to 1 million. But I guess the development is super fast. So that being said, the price is the lowest at Haiku, but Sonnet is still pretty cheap. Although it is an introductory price, it's going to go up by 50% after August 31st. So September 1, the price will increase, but still it's going to be, I think, the most capable model when it comes to like price to capable ratio. Although at that point, you may want to also default a lot to Opus. Opus 5 is, by the way, way stronger than Opus 4.8. So another good takeaway would be a lot of people, we see it with clients whenever we hop on calls, they are still using Opus 4.8 all the time because Claude, for some reason, didn't automatically switch 4.8 to 5 to people. You have to do it yourself. And you're paying the exact same for 4.8 as you would pay for 5, but it's a significantly less capable model. And I think that's also visible because Opus was 4.5, 4.6, 4.7, 4.8, and now it jumped to 5. So it's essentially a new territory, new category. So it's a way more capable model. And a lot of times Opus 5 is as good as Fable 5. So they are actually kind of on par. Fable 5 is going to be generally better, but Opus is half the price. So it's actually worth it to use quite often. And then one word about Fable 5, it's extremely expensive. So it's twice as expensive as Opus 5. And it is also twice as expensive as ChatGPT 5.6 Soul, which is on par with Fable 5. So ChatGPT is half the price as Fable. Fable is kind of on par, kind of better than ChatGPT, so it's still may worth to use. And if you have a max subscription, you can use it a lot because you have a lot of room. But if you have an API, it probably makes sense to limit using it. And so one important thing, Fable 5 is a Mythos tier model. And so Mythos came out a couple of months ago by Claude, and then they actually found a lot of security vulnerabilities, so they didn't release it to the public. And then Anthropic now has something called Project Glasswing that essentially is a couple of companies that have access to Mythos, and Amazon being one of them. And they are plumbing their security vulnerabilities with Mythos, and then I think they are going to release it. But Fable 5 is a version of Mythos, probably a little dumped version of Mythos, yeah, you can already use it. So I think it's very interesting to try it out at least. All right, a quick section on what Claude is bad at. So Claude is very, very focused on text and code, and it doesn't do anything else. And that's the reason why Claude Code really went viral, is because they were just really good at code. They didn't focus on anything else. They didn't focus on images or video. So that was the big thing. Like ChatGPT is very good at images now. But then Claude was like, okay, like we don't think image has a massive enterprise value. We're just going to focus on code and text. And so that is one thing. So no images, no video. Then the usage was is something you probably will hit your limits faster than with OpenAI. Like here we were talking that Fable is as good as GPT 5.6 Soul, maybe a little better, but costs twice as much. So you will hit usage walls faster. Claude is generally more cautious than other models. So it usually will push back a little bit more, even though sometimes it's not needed. And yeah, here it's more about just the video again. All right, so the last section on choosing your Claude model, you can use Haiku if you have any high volume, very short input tasks, maybe automations that you already built with Opus or with Fable, or your consultants built for you, and it just needs to be automated. And need to just very precisely follow a very, essentially, very precise description of the task. And then Haiku will be perfect. The only thing to watch for is the 200,000 token context window. But I think, again, if you have well-defined automations, then it can be good. Sonnet is go for everyday workhorse, especially if you're using the API. And ideally, if you have a subscription and you have plenty of tokens, then I would go ahead and just default mainly to Opus 5. And then Fable 5 is, again, for the hardest problem that you have. It is by far the most expensive model on the market, 2 times more expensive than ChatGPT's strongest model, which is on par with Opus. So I would mainly only use it if you have a subscription. All right, so that all being said, that would be everything about the different Claude models. If you have any questions left, feel free to leave a comment. I'll try to respond with everything to everything. And yeah, I will. If you like the video, please leave a like and subscribe so I can do more videos. And I'll see you in the next one. Thank you.